There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a room when the powerful realize they have made a catastrophic mistake, not the silence of peace and not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of a held breath, of words dissolving before they reach the tongue, of confidence curdling into something cold and unrecognizable, like milk left out on a warm counter by someone who never imagined they'd need it again. Marcus Webb had been waiting for that silence for 11 months. He had not rushed toward it. He had not engineered it with malice or nursed it with bitterness. He had simply continued to be, with complete consistency, exactly who he was. And he had let time do what time, given enough of it, reliably does to people who mistake the surface of a thing for its substance. And when that silence finally arrived, when it settled over the gleaming conference table of a downtown law office on a cold morning in late February, Marcus did not smile. He did not straighten in his chair or adjust his expression to communicate anything that wasn't already communicating itself. He simply set his leather document folio on the table with the quiet weight of something that had traveled a long distance to reach this particular surface, and he said, "Good morning." 2 words. The most ordinary words in the language. And in the context of that room, at that moment, with that man sitting across from him, they landed like a verdict. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, because before that silence, there was laughter. Loud, unguarded, careless laughter of the particular variety that people produce when they are absolutely certain the person they are laughing at has no mechanism to make them regret it. The kind of laughter that only exists in the absence of imagination, when a man is so thoroughly sealed inside his own understanding of how the world is ordered that the possibility of being wrong has simply never found a crack to enter through. They were wrong. If this kind of story speaks to you, the ones about patience and dignity and what happens when people mistake stillness for weakness and confuse the surface of a life for its depth, take a moment right now and hit that like button. And if you're new to this channel, subscribe, because we tell these stories every single week. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city or your country in the comments. We genuinely love knowing who is out there. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Marcus Webb was 53 years old when this story begins, and he looked it, though in a way that had nothing to do with decline and everything to do with the particular quality of a face that has been used consistently and honestly for a long time. Weathered, yes, but sharp. The face of a man who had spent decades thinking carefully about things that mattered, and had the unhurried expression that comes from having learned, at some point early enough to matter, that most urgency is manufactured. If you passed him on the street, you might not look twice. That had always been, in its own way, one of his more useful qualities. But if you assessed him the way certain people inevitably did, quickly from a distance, using only the most visible information, then your eyes would travel, almost involuntarily, to the truck. And the truck was the thing that caused the trouble. The truck was a 1994 Ford F250, dark green beneath the rust that had colonized both wheel wells and crept along the lower edge of the doors with the patience of something that understood it had time. The bench seat was original vinyl, cracked along the driver's side bolster from years of use, and the passenger side mirror was held in alignment by a strip of aluminum tape that Marcus had applied himself on a Tuesday morning 3 winters ago, early, before the day got started, the way he handled most things that needed handling. The tailgate bore the ghost of a decal he'd never completely removed, the faded outline of a sun and 2 capital letters, the remnant of a landscaping company logo from a business he had built and sold 18 years prior. The odometer read 241,000 miles. Every one of those miles was honest. Marcus had driven that truck for 22 years across every kind of weather and every kind of errand that a life in motion produces. He had driven it to construction sites before dawn, and to his daughter's school plays, and to his mother's funeral on a gray November morning when the heater had been working only intermittently, and he had driven the whole 3 hours without once considering stopping to warm up. He was not a sentimental man by habit. Sentiment, he had concluded long ago, was a fine thing in its right proportion and a hindrance in excess. But he was deeply loyal, and the truck had earned his loyalty the old-fashioned way, which was by never letting him down when the moment required it. He drove it to Prestige Motor Group on a Thursday morning in early March, not because he needed a new vehicle himself, but because his daughter Celine did. Celine was 26 years old, 3 years into her career at Hartley and Moran, the regional architecture firm where she had been hired as a junior associate and had just been promoted 2 weeks prior to senior associate on the strength of a civic housing renovation project she had led almost entirely on her own initiative. The promotion came with expanded client responsibilities and, more practically, a requirement for reliable transportation to construction sites and client visits across 3 counties. She had asked her father to come with her to look at vehicles. Not because she lacked the confidence to navigate a dealership — Celine had never lacked confidence for anything — but because Marcus knew cars at a level that most people don't, having spent the better part of his adolescence in his Uncle Raymond's garage in rural Georgia, learning the interior logic of engines before he fully understood the interior logic of people. He knew what questions to ask in a dealership, and more precisely, he knew how to read the quality of the answers. Prestige Motor Group occupied a sprawling glass and steel complex on Route 9, the kind of dealership that had decided somewhere along its development that the word experience was more accurate than transaction to describe what it offered. The showroom held 17 vehicles simultaneously, each one lit from above by precisely angled fixtures that gave them the quality of artifacts in a high-end exhibition. The carpet was deep charcoal gray, clean enough to suggest it was replaced rather than cleaned. The waiting area stocked 4 types of single-origin pour-over coffee. A large digital display near the entrance cycled through a rotating gallery of industry awards. Regional Dealer of the Year, 4 consecutive years. Customer Satisfaction Platinum Award, 2 years running. The inventory ranged from $60,000 on the accessible end to well north of $120,000 for the flagship models arranged near the back. Marcus pulled the F250 into the lot and parked near the entrance because that was where a space was available and there was no reason not to. He and Celine walked through the glass doors together, she in a tailored charcoal blazer over dark trousers, he in his canvas work jacket and work boots, the outfit he wore when he wasn't coming from or going to anything that specified otherwise, which was most of the time. They were not greeted immediately. This was not an accident. The salesperson nearest the door was a young man in his late 20s named Derek. His shoes were Italian leather and cost more than Marcus's monthly electricity bill, and he wore his professional confidence in the manner of something he had recently acquired and was still testing the weight of. When the doors slid open, Derek glanced over with the trained attention of someone whose job began with observation. His gaze moved, first to Celine, then to Marcus, and then, briefly but unmistakably, in a movement so practiced it had become involuntary, to the lot window, where the F250 was visible between 2 gleaming pre-owned certified vehicles, like a sentence that didn't belong in the paragraph. Something shifted in Derek's expression. It wasn't rudeness, exactly, nothing overt enough to be named in the moment. It was a recalibration, a quiet administrative decision made in less than 3 seconds that reorganized the quality of attention he was prepared to deploy. He let them stand, unacknowledged, for the better part of a minute. 45 seconds by Marcus's internal count, which he kept without visible effort. "Help you folks find something?" The word folks carried the real content of the sentence. It was not warm, it was a taxonomy. It said, "I have assessed you, I have placed you in a category, and this is the tier of service that category has authorized." Celine smiled pleasantly and without strain. She had inherited her father's patience along with his cheekbones. "We're looking at the Lexus GX in the back, the silver one. My father and I would like to take a look." Derek nodded with the measured enthusiasm of a man calibrating investment. "Beautiful vehicle, 78.5 fully loaded. Were you thinking more of a pause, fractionally too long to be accidental, a lease arrangement, or—" "Purchase," Marcus said. It was the first word he had spoken inside the dealership. He said it without emphasis and without volume, which somehow gave it more gravitational weight than if he had said it loudly. The way a heavier stone dropped into still water moves more of it than a lighter one thrown. Derek's smile adjusted by a few degrees. "Of course. Right this way." They followed him toward the back of the showroom. As they passed the central display area, a white Range Rover elevated on a low circular platform, lit as though preparing for a photograph. Marcus heard voices from the sales manager's office to his left. The door was ajar by 4 or 5 inches, the gap sufficient for sound to travel. He couldn't distinguish the words, but the register was clear. 2 men talking with the unreserved ease of people who believed themselves unobserved, the conversation light and comfortable, and then a sound that came through the gap without any ambiguity at all. Laughter. Marcus did not turn his head. Neither did Celine. But they both heard it, and they were both the kind of people who had learned, across years of occupying rooms that hadn't fully made space for them, to read the specific frequency of that kind of laughter. The F-25. O sat visible in the lot through the showroom windows. The connection was not difficult. Derek walked them through the GX with the competent efficiency of someone who had delivered this particular presentation 200 times and had arrived at a version of it that required minimal actual engagement. He touched the hood release, demonstrated the 3rd-row fold-down seating, opened the cargo area, noted the towing capacity with the same inflection he used for the ambient lighting. He mentioned financing options twice before either of them had so much as indicated a preference. Marcus listened in complete silence, conducting his own inspection in parallel, a physical, tactile, eyes and hands examination that had nothing to do with what Derek was saying and everything to do with what the vehicle itself was telling him. He checked the panel gaps along both front doors. He crouched at the front wheel and looked at the tire wear pattern. He put both hands on the hood, found the release without looking for it, and lifted it. He spent 90 seconds looking at the engine. The silence of those 90 seconds made Derek visibly uncomfortable in a way that manifested as a slight repositioning of his weight from one foot to the other, twice. "Everything look okay?" Derek asked, with the tone of a man who had already framed his follow-up for whatever came next, anticipating a response somewhere along the spectrum of, "Yes, I think so," to, "I'm honestly not sure what I'm looking at." "Front sway bar end links need replacing," Marcus said, lowering the hood with one clean motion. "And whoever prepped this vehicle used the wrong viscosity oil for the ambient temperature range on an outdoor lot in March. It's minor, but it will affect cold start behavior and wear patterns over time." He said it with the complete dispassion of someone reading a diagnostic result, neither critical nor performative, simply accurate. Derek blinked. He said nothing. Celine looked at her father with the composed, fractional smile of a woman who had watched this particular scene play out across her entire life. They went inside to discuss numbers, and this is where things deteriorated. The sales manager came out of his office to join them, and the sales manager's name was Richard Foley. He was 50 years old, broad-shouldered in the way of a man who had once been athletic and now occupied space with the same authority through sheer habit and accumulated confidence. He had been the managing partner of the flagship Route 9 location for 9 years, having taken the role when Marcus was still consolidating his second cluster of properties. He wore the particular ease of a man who had not been seriously challenged in a long time in a room he considered his own. A kind of atmospheric dominance, the air of someone for whom the outcome of every interaction in this building was a foregone conclusion before it began. He had the handshake of someone who used handshakes as instruments of measurement, firm and slightly prolonged, designed to tell you something about himself while simultaneously taking a reading on you. And he had the residual warmth in his expression of a man who had recently been laughing at something and hadn't entirely let it go. "Rich Foley," he said, extending his hand to Marcus first. His eyes moved through the same sequence Derek's had, the same 3-second assessment, the same quiet reclassification, the same brief, almost imperceptible shift in the register of what was being offered. "Beautiful truck you've got out there," he said, nodding toward the lot window. He said it the way people say things they are wearing rather than meaning, the way a costume works when the person inside it is confident no one in the room can tell. "Thank you," Marcus said. Foley sat across from them and took command of the room's direction with the casual ease of a man who had done exactly this thousands of times. He steered the conversation toward financing before a price had been agreed upon. He discussed monthly payment structures before either of them had asked. He made 2 comments about the GX being a significant investment, informational in surface, but layered underneath with the textural implication of a question he had decided not to ask directly. "Are you certain this is the right tier for you?" Marcus let both comments pass without response. He asked about the out-the-door price with all fees included. He asked for the dealer fees itemized by line. He asked whether the certified pre-owned certification covered drivetrain components, specifically or only the components explicitly listed in the certification checklist. Each question was constructed rather than improvised, built from a foundation of knowledge that had been accumulating since he was 15 years old in a garage in Georgia, and each one landed with a weight that made Foley's answers fractionally more careful. Then came the moment that would live, 11 months later, at the center of that silence. Foley leaned back slightly, the body language of a man about to offer something generous, and said, with the wide-open bonhomie of someone setting a trap he is completely certain is invisible. Tell you what, with a trade-in situation, depending on what you've got, we might be able to work the numbers to something friendlier. You drive in today? He knew they had. The F250 was directly in his sightline through the showroom window from where he sat. I didn't come to trade anything in, Marcus said. Of course, Foley said, the agreement smooth and immediate, the smile unchanged. And then, as though it were the most casual observation in the world, a pleasant aside between two people simply being honest with each other, he looked toward the lot window and said, though I'll be straight with you, on a vehicle like that one, a 94, 95, you're probably looking at scrap value at best, couple $100 maybe. We'd essentially be doing you a favor just taking it off your hands. From somewhere near the door, one of the other salespeople, a young woman named Brianna who had been arranging brochures with elaborate concentration, made a sound. It may have been a cough. Marcus was reasonably certain it was not a cough. The silence that followed the comment was brief, perhaps 3 seconds, but it had a specific quality. Marcus felt Celine's stillness beside him, the particular controlled quality of her restraint, which he recognized with the intimacy of someone who had been its origin point. He sat with the comment for those 3 seconds, letting it exist, letting it be exactly what it was, and then he uncrossed his ankle from his knee and set both feet flat on the floor. I appreciate the thought, he said. Not a concession, not a retreat, not anything that could be categorized as a response at all, technically. Just 5 words that acknowledged that a sentence had been spoken, and nothing more. Can we see the final numbers on the GX? They did not buy the car that day. Marcus reviewed the numbers with the attentiveness of a man who had read several thousand contracts across his professional life and had learned that the moment you stopped reading carefully was reliably the moment something cost you. He found 2 dealer fees that had been duplicated under different line items, a technique as old as the car business itself, presented with such practiced normality that most buyers absorbed it without recognition, the way you stop hearing a sound that has become part of the ambient environment. He didn't make an accusation. He didn't make a speech. He put his finger on the page and said one word. These. Foley looked at the page. He provided an explanation that began with the word essentially, and never arrived at anything specific. He provided a second explanation that contradicted the first on a factual point. Marcus thanked him for his time, stood, helped Celine with her chair as he always did because it was how he had been raised, and walked out. The F250 started on the first turn of the key, as it had without exception for 22 years. As they pulled out of the lot, Celine turned to her father. You want to tell me what that was? Marcus checked the mirror. They doubled a fee and hoped we wouldn't catch it. I meant the other part, the scrap value. He drove for a moment without answering. The lot receded behind them. I noticed it, he said. And? He changed gears at the light. There's nothing useful to do about something like that immediately, he said. Immediately is just reaction, and reaction's almost never the right size for the situation. Celine, who had been studying her father her entire life, the way you study something that is both familiar and not fully explainable, knew better than to push. She understood, in the way of someone who had grown up in the orbit of his decision-making, that her father operated on a different clock than most people, that what looked like stillness from the outside was often something else entirely from the inside. What she didn't know, what no one outside a very small professional circle had been positioned to know, was what had been quietly unfolding for the 8 months preceding that Thursday morning. What she didn't know was the nature of the thing that made the scrap value comment, in retrospect, one of the more expensive observations Richard Foley would ever make. Let us go back 7 months before that Thursday. The previous summer, Marcus Webb had begun the formal process of positioning a specific asset within Webb Property Development, the company he had built over 21 years from a single 2-unit rental on Clemson Street into a portfolio of 43 commercial and mixed-use properties across 3 counties, for a strategic transaction he had been considering for the better part of 4 years. Marcus had started with nothing that could honestly be called an advantage. He had grown up in a household where money was a subject treated with care and seriousness, counted and recounted before decisions were made, respected rather than assumed. He had worked construction at 16. He had learned HVAC at 18, spending 2 years after high school working for a licensed contractor who was exacting about both the work and the documentation of it. He had bought his first rental property at 27, with capital he had accumulated over 9 years of deliberate, disciplined saving, while living in a way that people around him variously described as admirable or baffling or unnecessarily austere, depending on what they valued. He drove used vehicles, always used, always maintained with the kind of disciplined attention that kept them operational long past the point when most people would have replaced them, because he understood with the clarity of someone who had done the actual arithmetic that capital deployed into depreciating assets was capital not compounding in things that built toward something. He had worn canvas jackets and work boots to meetings that other developers attended in sport coats, and he had been quietly underestimated at approximately 240 of those meetings across his career, which he had found, not bitterly, but with genuine appreciation for the usefulness of the thing, to be one of the more reliable strategic advantages available to him. People who underestimated you gave you information they would not have given someone they feared. They relaxed, they revealed themselves. They made comments about scrap value while you sat 3 feet away and took careful note. The portfolio he had assembled over those 21 years was valued, as of the previous October, at approximately $64 million. He did not discuss this in dealerships. The transaction he had been preparing for involved a commercial parcel that Webb Property Development had quietly acquired 4 years earlier on Route 9, a 2.4-acre lot immediately adjacent to the Prestige Motor Group complex, previously occupied by a landscaping supply company that had needed to liquidate quickly and cleanly. Marcus had paid honest fair market value. He had held it, leased a portion of the frontage to a storage facility operator under a short-term arrangement that covered carrying costs, and waited. He had purchased the parcel because Route 9 was a commercial corridor that had been showing consistent development pressure for 6 years, and the adjacent commercial operators would, at some point, either need to expand or watch their market position erode. He had no particular buyer in mind. He understood land the way a farmer understands a field. You don't always know exactly what it will yield, but you understand the conditions well enough to be patient. The previous summer, a commercial real estate broker had reached out to Patricia Ozzi's office on behalf of an auto group exploring expansion options along the corridor. The inquiry was professional and preliminary, exploring available parcels for a planned second service bay complex and additional display inventory space. The negotiation had proceeded through representation, as commercial real estate transactions at this level routinely do. Patricia's team had handled all direct communication. Marcus had been identified in the filed documents as the principal of Webb Property Development, which was his legal name on every document, but his personal name had never been surfaced in the negotiation conversations, and no one on the buyer's side had taken the step of tracing the principal name from the title history to the person. This was not uncommon. It was not concealment. It was simply how transactions of this scale normally worked, and Marcus had not taken any steps to obscure it. He had, however, taken careful note when Patricia's team confirmed, during the due diligence phase 3 months into negotiations, the identity of the managing partner of the Prestige Motor Group ownership group. 3 partners: Gerald Park, a silent investor; Stephen Calloway, operations; and the managing partner of the flagship Route 9 location, who would be signing on behalf of the partnership, Richard Foley. Marcus had read the name in the summary memo Patricia had sent him on a Tuesday afternoon in November, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He had read it twice. He had set the memo down and looked out the window for a moment at the driveway where the F-250 sat. He had thought about a Thursday morning in March, and a showroom with charcoal carpet, and a comment about scrap value delivered with the comfortable confidence of a man who could not imagine a version of the world in which the words would ever come back to him. He had picked the memo back up. He had written Patricia a single-line reply: confirm the principal attendance requirement at closing. He had not explained why. The closing meeting was scheduled for a morning in late February, 11 months after the negotiation had begun. Patricia had arranged it at her firm's offices on the 17th floor of a downtown building, the kind of conference room that was designed to communicate the seriousness of what happened inside it. Long table, floor-to-ceiling windows, the documents organized in precise stacks at each position, with the methodical care of someone who understood that the physical environment of a closing communicated as much as the terms themselves. Marcus arrived in the F250. This was a choice. He had a vehicle in the garage of his house, a dark blue Audi that he drove for occasions that specified it, and a Land Cruiser he kept for property site visits. He had considered them both on the drive from his house to the building, and he had arrived at the same conclusion he usually did when he considered the question of what he was presenting to a room. Present the truth. The F250 was the truth. It had always been the truth. He parked it in the surface lot at the front of the building, in a space that was directly visible from the lobby through the glass entrance wall. Patricia met him on the ground floor. She was 58 years old, with the composed authority of someone who had spent 3 decades being correct in rooms that frequently resisted it, and she had long since arrived at a relationship with Marcus where very little needed to be explained. She looked at his jacket and his boots with an expression that contained, if you knew how to read it, the faintest acknowledgement of what she understood him to be doing. "They're upstairs," she said, falling into step beside him. Foley arrived 20 minutes early. He seemed to be expecting the principal to present as... She paused, selecting the word with the precision of a woman who chose words the way a surgeon chose instruments, a different kind of person. "He'll make the adjustment," Marcus said. They rode the elevator in comfortable silence. The conference room held the particular atmosphere of a high-value closing, a controlled tension, the sense of a transaction that had taken considerable time and care to reach this table and was now a matter of signatures and sequence. Stephen Calloway was already seated, a trim and even-featured man in his late 40s who had the quality of someone who extended genuine courtesy as a baseline practice rather than as a calculation. Gerald Park appeared on the video screen at the far end of the table, punctual and quiet, with the watchful economy of a man who had attended enough closings to understand that observing carefully was more useful than speaking. 2 of Patricia's associates arranged the final document packets. Richard Foley stood near the window with a coffee cup, talking with one of Patricia's junior attorneys in the relaxed, self-presenting way of a man who was accustomed to being the most significant person in rooms and had learned to fill them with an ease that was itself a kind of statement. His back was partially to the door. He turned when Marcus and Patricia entered. The sequence that crossed his face was distinct and legible, moving through its stages with the helpless visibility of something the muscles couldn't control faster than the mind could process. First, recognition of Patricia, a professional pivot forward, a readying. Second, the figure beside her, a man in a canvas work jacket and scuffed work boots, with a face Marcus had seen described in project meeting notes over the years as hard to read, which generally meant it gave away nothing that the person hadn't decided to give. Third, and here was the pause, the gap between stimulus and response where everything lived. A memory rising. A Thursday morning in March. A showroom with charcoal carpet and single-origin coffee, a green truck visible in the lot. A comment about scrap value delivered to a man who had said very quietly that he appreciated the thought, and then stood up and walked out. The pause lasted 2 seconds, perhaps 3. In those seconds, the entire temperature of the room changed, and every person in it, Calloway, Park on the screen, Patricia's associates, the junior attorney near the window, felt it, even those who had no context for its source. Calloway looked up from the documents. Park's eyes moved with the slow deliberateness of a man recalibrating. "Marcus Webb," Patricia said, with the measured warmth of a professional introduction she had been, on some interior level, quietly anticipating. "Managing partner and principal of Webb Property Development. Richard, I understand you've met." Foley's mouth opened. It closed. It opened again, and what came out was assembled rather than natural, the controlled composure of a man who had operated in high-stakes environments long enough to know that the way you handled the moments you hadn't prepared for was itself a form of disclosure. "We have," he said. His voice was steady. His hand came forward. Marcus shook it. "Good morning," he said. The same two words, the most ordinary words in the language. He held Foley's eyes while he said them, not aggressively, not as a performance, but with the calm directness of a man who had nothing to conceal and never had. Foley said, "Marcus, we were expecting the principal, of course. I simply hadn't. The name didn't connect until just now to—" "There's no reason it would have," Marcus said pleasantly, sitting down. "The name is the same on every document in the file. Webb Property Development. Webb." He opened his document folio. "It's a simple name." He said it without any particular emphasis, which was the only emphasis it required. Patricia walked them through the closing terms with the unhurried authority of someone who had done this hundreds of times and understood that the quality of the process was itself part of what was being transacted. The purchase price, $850,000 for the 2.4-acre Route 9 parcel, representing genuine fair market value for a commercially zoned lot with road frontage in a high development corridor. Not a punitive price, not an extraction, but a fair price, which was what Marcus had instructed her to arrive at. The conveyance terms, the timeline, the representations and warranties. Calloway followed each page attentively. Park on the screen was still and watchful. Foley sat with the careful precision of a man who had made a private decision about how he was going to conduct himself for the next 40 minutes and was holding to it with the discipline it required. There was one element of the final closing documents that had been added at Marcus's direction during the last revision cycle, 3 weeks prior. It was a naming rights provision, modest in scope, unambiguous in language. A designated area of the new service wing, once constructed, would carry a permanent designation, the Webb Bay, named for the property family from whose hands the land had come. Patricia read the clause in her normal cadence, no special emphasis. Foley's eyes came up from the page and moved directly to Marcus. Marcus met them with the same clear, unhurried expression he had maintained for the entirety of the meeting. "It's a small thing," he said, "but the name means something to me." A pause, brief and complete. "Family names tend to." Foley looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded. Once, slowly, with the quality of a man who was understanding something in full for the first time. Not just the surface of it, but the architecture beneath the surface, the patience and precision of what had been quietly underway across all the months during which he had gone on being exactly who he was in his showroom, assessing trucks through windows and offering to do favors in the form of scrap value appraisals. The nod of a man arriving, however belatedly, at the correct understanding of where he was and how he had come to be here. They signed, all parties, in sequence. Gerald Park applied his electronic signature with the composed efficiency of a man who had seen every variety of transaction outcome and had made his peace with this one well before arriving. Calloway used a good fountain pen and made a remark about the weather outside, easy and genuine, that gave the room permission to release some of its accumulated tension. Foley signed last in the careful hand of a man who had decided, somewhere in the preceding hour, that the most useful thing available to him was to absorb this completely, without deflection, and to take from it whatever it was worth. Afterward, while Patricia's associates gathered and organized the signed packets, Stephen Calloway came around the table and approached Marcus near the credenza, where the water and coffee had been set out. He was direct in the way of a man who considered directness a basic courtesy. "I don't know the full history between you and Rich," he said quietly, with the candor of someone who had clearly worked out that there was a history and had decided that pretending otherwise was not the kind of thing he was prepared to do. "But I want you to know personally that this transaction means a great deal to the expansion timeline, and that I'd value the opportunity to build something real going forward, not just on paper." Marcus looked at him with full attention, the kind of attention that is itself a form of respect. Calloway had the quality of a man who said what he meant and would be consistent about it. "I appreciate that," Marcus said. "I mean it back. Calloway started to turn, then stopped. "I saw that truck in the lot when I came in," he said with a small, genuine smile. "F250, 94? 22 years, Marcus said. Calloway laughed quietly, a real laugh. "Some things you just can't let go of. Only if they've earned it," Marcus said. Foley was across the room during this exchange, standing with Patricia in a conversation that appeared professional and forward-looking. He did not turn in their direction. But Marcus had spent 53 years developing peripheral awareness, not paranoia, nothing like that. Just the steady, practiced attention of a man who understood that what happened in the spaces where people believed they weren't being observed was often more informative than what happened in the center of the room. And in Foley's posture, in the careful angle of his head, in the set of his shoulders, Marcus saw a man conducting a private accounting with himself, examining the ledger, running the figures, coming to the conclusion that the balance was not what he had believed it to be, and that this had been true for a long time, and that the only thing he could do now was decide what kind of person to be in response to that discovery. What Foley did with that accounting was his own matter. Marcus had not come to this room to produce a reckoning in someone else. He had come to close a fair transaction, to put a name on a wall above ground that had always carried that name in the title, and to drive home afterward in the vehicle that had brought him here, the same vehicle it had always been, worth exactly as much as it had ever been worth, which was considerably more than a few $100s to someone who understood the actual nature of value. He took the elevator down alone. The lobby was quiet in the late morning, marble-floored, the light coming through the glass, front in the flat, clear way of late February. Through the entrance wall, he could see the surface lot, and in it, among the standard-issue leased sedans and the associates' vehicles, the F250, dark green and rust-edged, the passenger mirror secured with aluminum tape, the tailgate carrying its faint ghost of a logo from a business that had come before this one and made this one possible. He walked through the glass door and crossed the lot toward it in the thin, cold light. The drive home took 22 minutes. He took the longer route, the one that passed Clemson Street, because he did this sometimes without particularly deciding to. It was less a habit than a kind of orientation, like consulting a fixed point. The 2-unit on Clemson looked good. It had looked good for years. He had sold it 12 years ago to a couple who had converted the lower unit into a dental practice, and they had maintained the exterior with care. The paint was a different color than when he had put it up himself in the summer of his 27th year on a borrowed scaffold in weather that had actively resisted the project. But the house was sound. He had built it to be sound. Celine called that evening after she had spent the afternoon piecing together, through his assistant and through the general field of information that moves through professional networks, the broad shape of what had been finalized. Her reaction was quintessentially her own, composed appreciation for the outcome, and barely contained exasperation at how little he had said to her on the drive home from the dealership 11 months ago. "You knew the whole time," she said. It was not framed as a question. "I knew there was a connection," Marcus said. "I didn't know how it would resolve." "You knew the minute you sat down across from him." He was quiet for a beat. Through the window the last light was leaving the sky in the particular way of late February evenings, the color going before the dark fully arrived. "I knew before that," he said finally. "I knew who the managing partner was before we went to the dealership." The silence on the line had a specific texture. "Dad, you went in there deliberately." "I went because you needed a car and I know cars. And because I needed to see him as a person, outside of the transaction, whether what happened in that office was incidental or whether it was simply who he was." He said it evenly, the way he said things that mattered to him, without decoration. You can learn a great deal about someone by how they treat a person they believe has nothing. Celine was quiet for a moment. He could hear her thinking, the way he had been able to hear her think since she was small. "What did you decide?" she asked. Marcus thought about the comment. Not the words themselves, those were simple enough, but the ease of it, the confidence, the complete absence, in that moment, of any consideration that the universe might be arranged differently than Foley had always assumed. The closed circuit of a worldview so thoroughly sealed against the unexpected that it couldn't even register the possibility of being wrong until it was sitting across from the proof of it in a conference room on the 17th floor. "I decided he needed to learn something," Marcus said. and that the situation had arranged itself in a way that made me the right teacher. And Celine. He let a brief pause sit between that and what followed, the way he did when he was placing something down carefully. I bought you the car. A full second of silence. I'm sorry? Called the Toyota dealer in Bellhaven on the drive home from the signing. They have a certified GX in white, full inspection documentation, all fees explained before I asked, a sales manager who met me at the door and offered to walk the contract line by line unprompted. I put it in your name. The keys are being delivered to your office tomorrow morning. She was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that builds when someone is working to hold something in and is not entirely succeeding. When she finally spoke, her voice had the particular texture it took on when she was trying to be composed and was not quite managing it. You are genuinely the strangest person I have ever known. I've had that said to me before. I love you enormously. I know you do. Tell me about your day. The F250 remained in his driveway, as it always had, as it would for whatever miles were left in it, 241,000 and counting, assuming the weather and the maintenance held. Some things you kept not because they were convenient or impressive, or because any reasonable appraisal would tell you they were rational to keep. You kept them because they were honest, because the record they carried in every mile and every repair and every morning they started without complaint was the kind of record that meant something specific to a person who understood what things were actually worth at the level beneath the surface. Richard Foley sent a written communication through Patricia's office approximately 6 weeks after closing. It was addressed to Marcus directly, 3 sentences long. Acknowledgement of the professional conduct of the transaction, recognition that the introduction at the closing had been, his word, unexpected, and an expression of hope that the professional relationship could proceed constructively going forward. It was not an apology. It did not need to be one. It was a man reporting, in the minimal language available to someone who was not practiced in this particular kind of disclosure, that the accounting he had done in the room that morning had produced a result. Marcus read it at his kitchen table on a Wednesday morning with his coffee. He asked Patricia to send a professional acknowledgement. He filed the original. He did not carry it around in him because he did not carry things that way. What he carried was different. It was the 43 properties and the 21 years and the 241,000 miles and the daughter with her own name now on the title of a certified GX in white, driving to client sites across 3 counties in a vehicle that had been sold to her without a single duplicated fee or a comment about what things were worth by someone who hadn't done the work of finding out. The expansion complex broke ground that following autumn on schedule on the Route 9 parcel that had once carried a ghost of a landscaping company logo on its deed history, the echo of a business that had come before, that had built the capital that had built the next thing and the next. 6 lanes, climate-controlled, state-of-the-art, everything a growing dealership needed to move into the next decade of its operation. The service wing went up clean. In the lobby of the new service wing, beside the intake door, there was a plaque. Brushed steel, modest in its dimensions, mounted at eye level where anyone coming through the door for a service appointment would pass it without necessarily slowing down. 4 words engraved in clean, even type. The Webb Bay. Established 2024. Most people who came in for a routine oil change or a tire rotation would read it in passing, if they read it at all, and move on. That was fine. It was not there for passing strangers. It was there because a name had been on the title to the land beneath that building for 4 years before a single wall of it was raised, quietly, without announcement, doing exactly what it was doing, regardless of whether anyone was watching. The name on that plaque was the same name that had been on the title, the same name that was on 43 other properties across 3 counties, the same name that belonged to a man who drove a 22-year-old truck because it had earned his loyalty, and because he had never once needed the surface of anything he owned to tell a story his actual life couldn't back up. There is a kind of confidence that announces itself. It needs the room to know. It calibrates its clothing and its vehicles and its handshakes to communicate a position, to establish a territory, to preempt the question of who it is by answering loudly and immediately with everything visible. And there is another kind of confidence, quieter, deeper, built on a different foundation entirely, that has simply never needed to announce anything because it knows exactly what it is and has always known, and that knowledge does not require an audience or a performance or an appraisal from someone sitting across a table making estimates about what things are worth. Marcus Webb had the second kind. He had built it the same way he had built everything else, carefully, over time, with his hands and his patience and his willingness to be underestimated by people whose understanding of value began and ended at the surface, which is, in the end, the only kind of confidence that actually holds when the room gets quiet. If this story stayed with you, if Marcus's patience felt like something you recognized or something you needed to hear today, then this channel is exactly where you belong. Hit that like button right now and drop a comment below telling us what you thought about how Marcus handled himself from beginning to end. We'd genuinely love to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we are here every single week with stories like this one. Tell us where you're watching from today, your city, your country, wherever you are. We love knowing who's out there listening. And we will see you in the next story, where quiet strength meets the moment it has been patient enough to earn.